Welcome to the 1876 Sports and Culture podcast. I say this every week, but it is an exciting show. Every show is exciting. So we're going to get started with talking about PV and Texas Southern on yesterday. I understand this environment was something to behold. Mike.
Oh my gosh, yes, something to behold. I mean, the game day atmosphere. I think on the docket was like 7,000 plus individuals in the house, but you could feel the energy and the air as soon as you walked in. But what took the show was not just the basketball game. It was that battle between the cheerleaders. And PV cheerleaders got into some verbiage debate, and that's like putting it lightly, with the TSU fan section. And let me just say, PV cheerleaders, they weren't taking no smack. They were given as much as they were as taken. But what started it was the TSU cheerleaders went to perform one of their little intermission break routines, and up walks the PV cheerleader, and it turned into a cheer off or a face off or whatever. And there were 3 different versions of this. First version, I got to give the PV, because they came and they basically kind of took the half court, and they were trying to separate the 2 groups because they were getting kind of chippy. And the one head cheerleader, I don't know her name. I want to find her name. She stood out on the floor and kind of gave a bye B, and you can insert whatever word you want to for B.
So
they walked off. Session 2, they got in, and I think I sent a video to everyone on the chat line about, and that was kind of like equal. Session 3, everybody was they were like trying to one-up each other. Oh, you got a flip? Oh, we're going to bring our flip artists in. Prairie View said, oh, we can do 2 flips. And then here's what took the show. Prairie View's male cheerleader came in and did a couple of flips. Then TSU's male cheerleader came and did one flip, and then fell to the floor like it was a breakdance move, and everybody in the building just fell out. And then it got more chippier from that point on. I'm telling you, besides the game, the crowd yelling, there were signs of pissy PV. I think I said that.
Oh, damn.
That environment, it was hostile, but it was so much entertainment. I mean, just beside, we'll get to the game later, but it was so much fun, and it was funny. You heard people talking about, oh, no, he didn't. No, she didn't, because I had the opportunity to sit at the scorers table, and I heard both sides. I heard the TSU folks talking, but I also heard the PV folks talking, and it was chippy. The cheerleaders were chippy. The basketball players were chippy. The coaches were chippy. The fans were. It was. Man, I wish they could get this on ESPN, because this was par excellence. This was great. This was great entertainment.
And it wasn't scripted?
No, that's the thing.
Oh my God.
That's strictly a you got served right there.
Yes.
And there were no weaves flying across the floor.
But
we should count that a win. That was a W. That was
there was some weaves flying, but I mean, it was all in attitude. But
might I point out?
And then there was this natural buildup, because you had senior night. You had, when you go to Houston, you got all these dignitaries that want to be recognized. And then they had long 30, 25 years serving folks that they also played homage to. And so the game actually started about an hour late. It's supposed to 7:30. It was about 8:30 when the men's game actually tipped off. So you had people that literally getting lathered up, and you could feel it in there. So they list the capacity of H&P Arena as 8,100. So they list, as Mike said, over 7,000 to be exact. It was 7,284 ticket sales. So you're talking about 90% capacity, and you felt it in there. And it was good, because, we haven't experienced this really in the last couple of years. Wow. Obviously, you had the great home crowd at Prairie View, but we really hadn't had this type of capacity between those 2 games in this area in some many moons, as they would say.
Might I point out, Mike said a flip artist. What is a flip artist, bro?
There were several flip artists, and each one was trying to outdo the other one at mid-court. and the crowd taking them on. I'm like,
you know what flip artists are.
Hey, that's a new mic term right there.
They're brand new.
With the male flip artists, with the male flip artists, both ended up with a snap. So,
that's when you know it's real.
Exactly. So
you did.
Oh, let's move on, man.
I know.
So it was a great night.
I could talk for days about this,
Yeah.
but man, it was crazy.
So when we
other than the final score for the men's, and with the women winning, it was a good night in terms of pure entertainment. As they say, the culture won, SWAC won.
Yeah, SWAC won. SWAC won with this one.
And it need to be on TV next time.
So I know it was last time we had, we're moving on. The last time we had the track coach, and she said she wanted a record on that track. And so I hear something exciting is coming to our track. Joe, you want to clue our listeners in?
PV Relays will be hosting a HBCU track pro series on March the 25th. So all your top level pro track athletes who went to HBCUs who are now on a pro circuit, the high level A circuit as they call it, will be at that event March the 25th. So if you want to see some high caliber Olympic level athletes on the track, you may want to show up. That's going to be a pretty outstanding event with them running on that awesome track that we have out there now. They're going to put up some big time times.
Mm-hmm. And then also that's awesome. And then talking about HBCUs, Mike, if you could just fill us in as far as U.S. Representative David Scott and other legislators, the call that they have right now for Congress as it relates to HBCUs.
Yeah, so there's a committee existing, and I got this from several sites. There's an HBCU, one of the PV HBCU websites, and I also got it from the PVA AMU news site. So there's an agricultural committee chairman, David Scott, and he works in education and labor committee. He also works with Bobby Scott, who works on the HBCU caucus chair and agricultural committee vice chair, Alma Adams. So they're calling out folks on atrocities and disparities between the 1890 and 1862 land grant institution. And there are a lot of disparities. So I had to do a little bit of educating on my own. So let's just kind of rewind, press play. You know that, in 1862, President Lincoln signed the Morrill Act. A lot of us knew that, right? So under the 1862 Morrill Act, it created a vast majority of what we know as land grant institution. But the Morrill Act of 1890 basically worked with 18 Black land grant institutions. The federal government committed to providing financial support to schools so long as the states matched that level of support. So although the 1890 land grant universities produced a lot of people, there continues to be a lot of disparities. To further, add to that, that Morrill Act of 1890 was aimed at former Confederate states. This act required each state to show that race was not an admissions criterion or else designate a separate land grant institution for persons of color. So that number of 18 grew to 70. And, there are a lot of, what we know as HBCUs. So it really kind of combined the 1862 Act with the 1890. So they're challenging that, saying that those disparities are still there. There's not enough time to really go into detail, but I had to do a lot of research on my own. It also provided for basically farming, agricultural institutions, those of higher learning. So they're really pushing hard for this. I don't know where this will end up, but it was really interesting for me to go back and read this, because you've always heard about the 1862 Act, but very little is said about its relationship to the 1890 Act.
We know where this is going to end up.
365 days black. Go ahead, Mike, with the Black History Moment in March.
during Women's History Month. That's a lot of information. Basically, they said we found some more money that we owe y'all.
Yes, exactly.
They found it. They knew about time to give it up. Go ahead, bring it on. We'll take it though, but it'll make them feel good.
Better late than never.
Oh, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So SWAC, I understand that they've offered Tennessee State University.
They hadn't made the offer.
They hadn't made an offer.
Made
Okay,
the
let me
offer.
correct.
offer.
Let me correct that. Okay,
Yeah,
so what's
go get some people really excited. They already excited just because they talked. So
Yeah,
okay.
Contact was made.
Contact was made.
1876 Sports and Culture broke the news. They actually offered it.
They made an offer. That's right.
So,
my bad.
Shanetta trying to get us trending and breaking news on
Shanetta's just telling
CNN.
what y'all waiting on. Shanetta's like, what's the problem? We know what needs to happen. Make the offer.
So the SWAC commissioner, Dr. Charles McClellan, reached out and contacted Tennessee State University to gauge their interest in joining the SWAC, since the OVC is crumbling and falling apart at the seams. And we all know Tennessee State needs a new home, and Eddie George has come out and stated that he fully intends on leaving the OVC and finding a better financial and athletic situation.
Clay, you forgot the best of the news. Who broke the story, man?
And I was gonna let you do that part. Dr.
No, you don't tell yourself that you broke the story.
Dr. Kenyatta
like you just did.
That's because you ain't gonna do it.
Yada broke the news a couple days ago, and all
our very own 1876 Sports and Culture.
You're not gonna be teaching me in public now. So all of various news agencies picked up Dr. Cavill's tweet and ran with it, and so there were discussions all over the SWAC universe about will it happen, and if it does, that would make 13 teams in the SWAC. So who would be number 14? Because we know Tennessee State ain't got no choice; they better make the move. So who would be number 14, and for what reason?
I think maybe Hampton. They would be the other Division I school.
Well, they're confirmed, and they're in the solidly in the CAA. Are they not?
I don't know. I saw Dr. Cavill wearing a Clark Atlanta hat.
I did see that.
Just saying. He's known to throw. He's known to throw those proverbial hints out there.
So let's start with the easy ones. You got the
Atlanta
schools.
money.
You got schools like South Carolina State sitting in the MEAC. The MEAC is not exactly firm right now. So I know the first names people throw out there are teams like South Carolina State, for whatever reasons. That may not necessarily be a good partner with the SWAC because of location. So then when you see Yada wear a hat like a Clark Atlanta, then you say, well, damn, they are in the SWAC footprint. However, and they have the Atlanta market. However, they not D1.
That's where, and I guess to go back to my point with Hampton and Tennessee State would be your two D1s that are not either MEAC or SWAC.
I must admit, I had never heard anybody mention Hampton.
Not in my whole life.
Up for even bringing that to the table. I think the same concern a lot of people have with South Carolina State would be the distance. I think in terms of a D1 program, it fits that profile. The marketability of Hampton, it fits that profile. They just left the Big South to the CAA, the Colonial Athletic Association. So I'm not sure, because that means essentially people don't realize they had to pay like $500,000. Now they may try not to pay it, and Big South may have to sue them. But essentially, if you leave a conference, usually there's a fee that you have to pay to leave, which is generally speaking in most FCS levels is about $500 million if you leave within a year. If you leave early, in some conferences actually doubles. It may be $1 million, which is the case for the OVC for sure. South Carolina State, same issue, the distance. I think what's interesting for our podcast, being in the West, some people have thrown out, and this has kind of been back and forth over the years, is Langston University, a former member of the conference. True. So, I'm curious what some folks our listeners may think about that. Would they prefer Langston? Obviously, Clark Atlanta University, in terms of getting the Atlanta market, Another part that I've thrown out there that people may not realize is the academic. You know, there's 5 R2 institutions out there, which research tier. We talked about that on here when Prairie View was announced as an R2, along with Southern, Texas Southern, Jackson State, and FAMU. So if you bring in Tennessee State and Clark Atlanta, now you have 7 of the 14 that'd be R2, which is a significant move. But the question that I wanted to get in, because all this is out there in some ways, is for our listeners, you know, if you go to 14, you split in 7 division, who comes over to the West?
That's the
and
question.
Who do you prefer?
Yeah.
I think that's a question that Joe kind of put out there. I hope, you know, I'm kind of concerned to some degree it may be Valley, and this is not to be disparaging of Valley because they did what they had to do to us last year. So they don't need to be our punching bag. But is it Valley that comes over? Is it Jackson State that comes over? You know, who comes over, who may volunteer if it's a team in the East Side, like Clark Atlanta. If it's West Side, like Langston, it's pretty natural. Langston stays in the West and you make it easy. So I think at this point, it's going to be a NAIA Division II program. Some people are concerned about the $1.6 million, but that's not as big as people make it seem to be when you talk about if you're making a move, the games you can play, the buyouts. You can get to $1 million pretty easy.
Well, let's talk about
the other thing to consider is matching spring programs. You know, who has golf, who has other programs that you would want in a D1 program. I think I agree with Dr. Cavill to go from D2 to D1. I think it's probably going to be a D2 program, most likely. Remember the objective on an expansion is to gain market value that you don't have. You're expanding into another market, other opportunities. So, or that's one of the objectives. So in what scenario are you gaining additional markets? And then the other thing to consider, Dr. Yada talked about it, was R&D, but spring sports. You know, we're talking about football, but we're also talking about baseball. We're talking about football, track and field. Who can step up and compete in that arena as well?
So where does that put Clark Atlanta? Because they're obviously the sexiest of the two out, if you're talking about Clark Atlanta and Langston. They're the sexiest for market value and just attraction, appeal. But spring sports wise, their sports program overall and coming from D2. Are they in a place to make that move?
A lot of your D2, to your point, Joe, didn't want to jump in there too quick, but I got where you were going, is the Division I requires that you have 14 sports, essentially 7 men, 7 women. You can do 6 and 8, 6 men, 8 sports. And if you just take Clark Atlanta, in many of sports, people, it's not that far from Division II in terms of sports that you look at. They have like 7 sports already on the women's side. They have essentially 5. You add track and field, which counts essentially as 3 sports. And if you do men and women, it's 6. So just with that sport alone, you're almost halfway to the market. And when I say that, they literally count cross country as a sport. They call track and field, they split up in 2, indoor and outdoor. So you almost get credit for one sport and almost 6 times. So in that way, it's not that hard. But even looking at Tennessee State, people may not realize Tennessee State doesn't have baseball. Neither does Langston, Clark Atlanta does. But I've heard that Tennessee State was thinking about bringing back baseball. Obviously, we've heard them talk about hockey, men's and women's, for whatever that's worth. So it's not that you can't add sports, and all the programs in the SWAC don't necessarily play all Olympic sports. Some are missing golf, some are missing tennis. So just, be mindful of that everybody doesn't offer everything. You're going to offer your main sports, football, men's and women's basketball, softball to some degree, and and you just go.
What about the proposition of just bringing in Tennessee State without a 14th just right now? You know, potentially bringing them on and bringing number 14.
That wouldn't be a deal breaker. You could do 13, and I'm sure if all things lined up and there wasn't a 14th, remember that they were ready to go with in a year's time or whatever, they could do it with 13. Yes.
And would Tennessee State be a potential member for the West, or would they definitely go to the East because of travel?
I would think that they would lean to go to the East because of travel and some of the markets. You got to remember you had that Florida Classic with Tennessee State and FAMU. So I'm sure they would want to keep that. Obviously, they have the Jackson State rival. They want to keep that for when Alabama A&M moved up in like 92. For about 10 years, the Alabama A&M, Tennessee State rival was big. When L.C. Cole left and was coach at Alabama State from Tennessee State, that for about 5-6 years was a pretty big rival. So there's some rivals already in the East that I'm sure that they would prefer and ask to try to stay in the East.
Yeah. Can I give some history real quick before
Yes,
I move
ma'am.
on? So if Tennessee State were to come to the SWAC, we're aware that in 1912 that the Tennessee Agricultural and Industrial State Normal School for Negroes was founded, again in 1912. But the Texas State University for Negroes was founded in 1947. So 1947, it wasn't until, let me see, my reading was 1968 that it became Tennessee State University. So the real TSU is Texas Southern University.
Nice. Nice. 12
Mm.
cousins over there. Don't say we ain't never gave nothing to y'all.
Stop.
Exactly.
Stop.
So
Acknowledge.
Sprinkle a little salt on it.
History.
Sprinkle a
That's
little
how you
salt on it.
instigate
I like
right
it.
there.
I like it.
That's high level instigation. I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
yes, I'll give them that. So, and again, twice. Texas State University for Negroes, then Texas Southern University. So twice.
They were
TSU.
founded 2 times before Tennessee State.
So,
There you
so
go.
what do we do with that Poet Society? We start.
Reach.
He going back
Hey.
to the tumbling folks again.
Hey, saying the last year, the SWAC is hot. And
Yeah.
it's just getting, I think the Tennessee State coming to the SWAC is imminent, and it's all about who's number 14. I'm just gonna put it out there.
Yeah. If this was all
Absolutely.
about, if this was about band though, I would say keep looking if we're talking about Clark. But I'm not gonna go there right now. Well, I think I just went there, but
did.
Yeah, you
it's
just
not,
did.
yeah, it's not exciting. They're not
I
exciting
think
at
that's
all.
fair. I think that's
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
But
They'll
we
get
know it's
better.
not.
Where you previously had Morris Brown that was pretty good. So if they get the band director,
Yeah.
you do have student populations of urban high schools that they could bring the
Yup,
band
they could.
on really quickly. So
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Great point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think they would, as soon as they got to the SWAC, they would understand that they need to up their band game, and things would
Yes.
change.
Indeed. All right, and then last, Mike, we have a TED talk that occurred.
Yeah.
Has or have occurred, may have occurred.
So yes, yeah. So what was it? I may have gotten this wrong. So this year's program started on March 5th. It featured four speakers, including Northwestern University's researcher Chase Lavalis, Ivy Walls, founder of the Ivy League Farms in Houston, data scientist Jared Bryson, as well as current PVAMU student Maya McFarland. So the outlier, and they kind of got this outlier from a book, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second, provides that hard work and opportunity in almost all cases are important, more important also than intelligence. And this will kind of permeate into several discussions. However, the talks will not be available until April 5th, I believe, on the official YouTube channel. So many of you had a chance to, check out the first TED Talks. I only had a chance to check it out, or briefly check it out. So definitely check it out. It won't be available, or it won't be available until April 5th on the official YouTube channel. So the outlier concept, just for those who are not familiar, is by a book by, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell or somebody. It's required reading within the honors program at PVAMU. And an outlier is an individual who does things that go beyond kind of the realm of the norm and the ordinary, speaks out about things, atrocities. And in this book, it states that success doesn't happen at once. It isn't solely based on intelligence. Instead, it's based on various factors. And so these talks are aimed at around those concepts in the book. So session 2, TEDx, available April 5th. it's happened, but it won't be available until April 5th. So
Very nice. Very
Good,
nice.
good stuff.